Sophia Reynolds had always dreamed of taking a luxury cruise. The idea of spending a week at sea, exploring exotic islands and enjoying 5-star meals had always seemed like the perfect escape. When she received the invitation in the mail, she felt a rush of excitement. It was a personal invitation from the Silver Horizon Cruise Line, an exclusive trip to a hidden tropical paradise. The invitation promised a luxury cruise unlike any other, with unlimited food, entertainment, and experience. For Sophia, this was her chance to get away from everything: the stress of her job, the weight of her responsibilities, and the recent loss of her mother. A chance to relax and unwind. She didn't think twice about booking her ticket. The day of departure arrived, and Sophia found herself at the port, her suitcase in hand, looking up at the massive ship that would take her to places she'd only dreamed of. It was enormous, tall, sleek, and shining in the morning sun. The Solstice Horizon, its name glittering in silver letters on the side, was a floating city. The ship was a marvel of luxury, boasting state-of-the-art amenities, restaurants, pools, and even a theater. As she boarded the ship, she felt a sense of anticipation bubble in her chest. She was surrounded by other passengers, but none of them seemed familiar. Most of them appeared to be seasoned cruisers, middle-aged or elderly, dressed in their best vacation clothes. Sophia was one of the few who appeared to be traveling alone, and yet no one seemed to mind. It was as if everyone was in their own. After checking into her cabin, a small but cozy room with a beautiful ocean view, Sophia made her way to the deck. The ship was about to set sail, and she could see the bustling port behind her as the crew readied the ship for departure. As the ship's horn sounded, signaling the beginning of the voyage, Sophia's excitement grew. She found a quiet spot on the deck and leaned against the railing, watching the land grow smaller and smaller as the ship sailed farther into the open ocean. She was alone, and yet something about the atmosphere of the ship didn't sit right with her. The first few days of the cruise passed in a blur of indulgence. Each day was filled with activities, from guided excursions to private cooking classes, from poolside relaxation to lavish dinners. The staff was attentive, the passengers seemed happy, and everything appeared perfect. But the longer Sophia stayed on the ship, the more she began to notice strange things. It started on the second night. She had gone to the Grand Theater for a show. The entertainment was top-notch, and the audience seemed mesmerized by the performance. However, as the final act ended, a peculiar thing happened. The lights flickered for a brief moment. At first, Sophia thought it was part of the show, an effect meant to heighten the drama. But then the lights dimmed again. This time, the audience gasped. For just a second, she thought she saw a shadow move across the stage, something large, and she shook the thought away. It was probably just her imagination. The show had been thrilling, and the dimming lights could have been a technical glitch. But over the next few days, the strange occurrences multiplied. First, there was the incident at the pool. Sophia was enjoying the sun when a strange chill swept through the area. The air became unnaturally cold for a few seconds, making her skin prickle. She turned to the other passengers around her, expecting to see similar reactions, but no one seemed to notice. The staff continued with their duties as if nothing had happened. Then, during dinner one evening, the ship's captain made an announcement, informing the passengers that they would be passing near a secluded island, a place not often seen by tourists. It was part of the cruise's exclusive itinerary, and though it sounded intriguing, Sophia felt a sense of unease. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, something she couldn't explain. And then there were. Every night, as Sophia drifted to sleep in her cabin, she began to have the same strange dream. She was standing on the deck of the ship, staring out at the dark ocean. The water was black, and there was no moonlight to guide her. She could hear whispers, soft, distant voices calling her name. At first, the whispers were faint, but with each night they grew louder, more urgent. They beckoned her toward the edge of the ship, where the water churned in a violent, unnatural way. The whispers spoke in a language she didn't understand, yet somehow she knew what they were saying. They were calling her to the depths of the ocean, to something hidden beneath the waves. She woke up each morning feeling unsettled, her heart racing, as if the dream was more than just a product of her imagination. By the fourth day, things started to get even stranger. Sophia was having lunch in one of the ship's restaurants when she overheard a conversation between two passengers at the next table. The woman was speaking in a hushed voice, as if afraid to be heard. "I haven't seen my husband since last night," the woman whispered, glancing nervously around the room. "He went to bed early, but when I woke up this morning, he was gone. I searched the ship, but no one has seen him." Her companion, a man in his 50s, looked concerned, but also intrigued. "You think he could have left the ship early?" "No," the woman replied, her voice trembling. "The ship is too far out. No one can leave once we're in open water. And the thing is, I saw his suitcase in the room this morning. He didn't even take his teeth." Sophia tried to ignore the conversation, but the woman's words lingered in her mind. There was something off about the whole situation. The idea of someone disappearing in the middle of the night without a trace was That evening, the woman was gone from the dinner table, and no one seemed to know where she had gone. The staff seemed unusually distant, and when Sophia asked about her, they only gave vague answers. "I'm sorry, madam. Perhaps she left the ship early. Perhaps she went for a walk." But as the hours passed, the disappearance began to sink in. The woman had been real, the missing husband had been real, and yet, the crew wasn't acting like anything was wrong. The next morning, during breakfast, Sophia overheard another passenger talking about strange noises they'd been hearing the previous night. The sound of footsteps running down the hallway, the sound of whispers from empty rooms. Sophia's curiosity piqued, and she decided to take a walk around the ship to clear her head. As she wandered the corridors, something caught her eye, a door that was slightly ajar. It was near the crew quarters, a part of the ship she hadn't yet explored. The door was not marked and appeared to be unoccupied. Curiosity got the better of her, and she pushed the door open, just a crack. Inside, the room was dark, and there was a strange metallic smell in the air. She stepped forward and froze. In the far corner of the room, there was a figure standing motionless, a man in a uniform, his back to her. His head was slightly tilted, as though listening to something. "Excuse me?" Sophia called, her voice shaking slightly. "Is everything?" The man did not respond. She stepped closer, and as she did, she noticed the strange markings on the walls, dark, oily smudges that seemed to pulse faintly in the dim light. The air was heavy, almost suffocating. The silence felt like it was closing in around her. And then, the man turned. His face was pale, his eyes wide and empty, his lips twisted into an unsettling smile. I've been waiting for you," he said, in a voice that sent chills down her spine. Before she could react, the door slammed shut behind her, plunging her into complete darkness. Sophia's heart raced as the door slammed shut behind her. She stumbled back, her hands pressed against the cold metal as she tried to catch her breath. The room was pitch black, the kind of darkness that made it hard to tell where the walls ended and the shadows began. The strange man, the one in the crew uniform, was still standing across the room. She couldn't make out his features, but his eyes glinted in the dark like two pale spots of. "I've been waiting for you," he had said, his voice deep and unsettling. Sophia could feel her stomach twist into knots. Who was this man? Why did he seem to know her? She didn't know what was going on, but she knew one thing for certain: she needed to get out. Her hands fumbled for the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. She pulled and tugged, but the door was sealed shut. Her breath caught in her throat as she realized she was trapped. A soft laugh came from the darkness. "Don't worry," the voice said, "too calm, too cold. No one can hear you down here." Sophia felt a wave of dread wash over her. She backed away, her feet stumbling on the hard floor, but then her back hit something, an object. She whirled around and found herself face to face with the same man who had been standing across the room. He hadn't moved, but now he was closer. "Who are you?" Sophia managed to whisper, her voice trembling. The man didn't respond right away. His face remained expressionless as he took a step forward, closing the gap between them. Then, finally, he spoke. "We are all waiting for..." Sophia's mind raced. What was he talking about? What did he mean by waiting? The thought of being trapped on a ship with no way out was too much to handle. Her eyes darted around, searching for a way to escape, but the room was bare. No windows, no exit, just darkness and a figure who seemed to know something she didn't. Suddenly, there was a click, like the sound of a lock being undone. The door creaked open, just slightly, and the man took a step back, motioning toward the exit. "Go ahead, you're free to..." Sophia's instincts screamed at her to run, but something in his voice, something in his calm demeanor, made her hesitate. The hair on the back of her neck stood up. Why was he letting her go so easily? With a trembling breath, she stepped toward the door. But before she could reach it, the man spoke again. "Warn you, Miss Reynolds," he said, his voice a low whisper. "You can't escape. Not from them." The door swung open all the way then, and for a moment, Sophia hesitated. But there was nothing left for her to do. She had to leave. She had to find out what was happening on this ship before it was too late. The hallway outside the room was silent. The lights above flickered, casting shadows that seemed to move on their own. Sophia glanced over her shoulder. The door she had just emerged from was now firmly closed. There was no sign of the man who had been standing there. It was as if he had vanished into thin. Taking a deep breath, she moved down the corridor, her footsteps echoing loudly in the otherwise silent ship. The walls seemed to close in on her, and the oppressive feeling from earlier returned. It was as if the ship itself was. She needed answers. The man's cryptic words kept playing in her head. You can't escape, not from them. Who were they, and why was she the one they were waiting for? Sophia quickened her pace, her mind swirling with questions. She walked through the deserted hallway, passing the rooms of other passengers. They were all locked tight, the doors leading to dark, quiet cabins. But something was off. The ship should have been bustling with life, with passengers out on the deck, eating in the restaurants, enjoying the entertainment. But no one was around. At the end of the hall, she saw a small staircase leading up to the next deck. She made her way up, hoping to find someone who could explain what was happening, someone who could reassure her that she was just imagining things. As she reached the next deck, she was met by an eerie silence. The dining room was empty, the grand lobby lifeless. The grand piano in the corner stood untouched, its keys gathering dust. Even the crew members were gone, leaving only the faint hum of the ship's engines in the background. "Hello?" Sophia called out, her voice cracking. No response. A cold shiver ran down her spine as she walked deeper into the ship. She passed the main lounge area and then noticed something in the distance. Figures standing in a circle, their backs turned to her. They were all dressed in identical black uniforms, their faces obscured by hoods. Sophia stopped in her tracks, her pulse racing. She had to get closer to see who they were, but something stopped her. The air around them felt heavy, like it was charged with a strange energy. Suddenly, one of the figures turned around, their eyes gleaming in the dim light. Sophia froze. It was the man, the same one who had spoken to her in the dark room. He raised his hand slowly, pointing directly at her. "You shouldn't have come," he said, his voice echoing eerily through the empty space. "But now that you're here, you'll understand." The others began to turn toward her, their movements slow, deliberate, as though they were all waiting for something. Waiting for. Sophia's heart pounded in her chest. She backed away, but the more steps she took, the closer they seemed to. "No," she whispered to herself. "This can't be real. This can't be happening." But it was. It was happening right in front of her. Sophia ran. She didn't care where, just away. She had no idea where to go, but all she knew was that she needed to escape the figures, escape whatever dark force had taken hold of the solstice horizon. She sprinted down the hallway, her footsteps echoing louder and louder in the stillness. Her breath came in short gasps as she turned a corner, desperate for an exit. But the ship seemed to stretch on forever. There was no escape. The walls were closing in on her, and she felt a sense of claustrophobia begin to settle in. Then, as if the ship itself was mocking her, the power went out. The lights flickered, and then everything went black. Sophia's pulse quickened. She was plunged into total darkness, the only sound the thundering of her own. Suddenly, she heard something, a low, scraping noise from behind her. It was slow, deliberate, as if whatever was making it was taking its time, savoring her fear. Her instincts screamed at her to run, but there was nowhere to go. She couldn't even see her own hand in front of her face. And then, through the silence, a voice. "You can't escape, Sophia," it whispered. "You never." It was the same voice as the man she had seen earlier, but it wasn't just him. Now, it was coming from all directions, from the walls, from the shadows. It surrounded her, pressing in on her. She felt the chill of the ocean air creep into the hallway, followed by the sound of waves crashing. Something was waiting for her, something in the deep. Sophia turned and ran blindly, not knowing if she was going towards safety or deeper into the heart of the ship's nightmare. Sophia's heart raced as she ran through the pitch-black hallway, her mind spinning. The voice that had whispered her name was still echoing in her ears. It wasn't just in her head. It was coming from the walls, the floor, the very air around her. The darkness seemed to press in on her, suffocating her, and yet, she couldn't stop. She had no choice but to run. The ship groaned beneath her feet, as if the solstice horizon itself were alive, shifting, moving like some great beast in the depths of the ocean. The sounds of the waves crashing against the hull were deafening, and the silence that followed the darkness only made the air feel heavier, as if the whole ship was holding its breath. Sophia stumbled down the narrow hallway, her palms pressed against the cold metal walls as she tried to steady herself. The sounds of her breath, loud, ragged, were the only thing she could hear now. Then, a soft crack. The sound of a door opened. Sophia froze, her heart in her throat. She wasn't alone. She could feel the presence of someone, or something, just behind her. She turned slowly, her eyes straining in the dark, trying to make out any shape. And then she saw them. The figures from before, the hooded ones, appeared from the shadows, gliding down the hall toward her. Their faces were still obscured, their bodies moving in unnerving synchrony. Sophia took an instinctive step back, but she felt something grab her wrist. A cold, clammy hand that sent a jolt of terror through her entire body. She spun around to face the figure behind. "Please, stop," she gasped, her voice barely a whisper. "What do you want from..." The figure's head tilted slightly, its empty hood casting an eerie shadow over the face that she could never fully see. The hand around her wrist tightened, its grip like... "You've already given us what we want," the figure said, its voice low and disembodied, as if it were coming from everywhere at once. "You are part of the ship now. You belong to the..." Sophia struggled, trying to break free, but the figure was too strong. Fear surged through her like a tidal wave. She had to get away, had to escape. "Let me go," she cried, trying to twist out of its grip. But the figure didn't respond. Instead, its other hand slowly reached up to pull back the hood, revealing something that made Sophia's blood run cold. The face that appeared wasn't human, not entirely. It was a grotesque, pale mask, with hollow black eyes and skin that seemed to ripple and shift like water. The features were blurred, as if the face wasn't fully formed, constantly shifting between different shapes. Sophia's knees buckled beneath her, but the figure held her up with an unnatural... "You will understand soon enough. It's..." Suddenly, the lights flickered back on. Sophia blinked in confusion. She looked around in disbelief. The hallway, once dark and oppressive, now appeared as it had before, bright, clean, and ordinary. The hooded figures were gone. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming, but the tight grip on her wrist reminded her that this was no dream. Her eyes darted to the nearest door. It was ajar, as if waiting for her to... She had no choice. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was small and dimly lit, with a large round table in the center. There were maps spread out on the table, some ancient and yellowed with age, others marked with strange symbols that Sophia couldn't understand. The walls were covered in old nautical charts, depicting ships, islands, and places that didn't exist on any map sheet. Sophia's breath hitched. She stepped further into the room, her eyes scanning the clutter of books, scrolls, and strange artifacts that littered the shelves. It felt like she had stumbled into a hidden part of the ship, something the rest of the passengers weren't meant to see. Then, she saw it. In the far corner, behind a thick velvet curtain, was a large wooden chest, its surface carved with symbols she recognized from her nightmares. The same strange symbols she had seen on the walls of the dark room where the man had first spoken to her. They seemed to move and shift as she stared at them, as if they were alive. Before she could investigate further, a voice spoke, low and gravelly from behind. "You shouldn't be." Sophia spun around to find the man from earlier, the one who had been waiting for her in the dark room. He was standing in the doorway, his pale face illuminated by the faint light from... "Why?" she demanded, her voice shaky but determined. "What is this place? What is happening on this..." The man's face remained calm, but his eyes were filled with something cold, something ancient. "This ship," he began, "was never meant to carry passengers. It was meant to carry something else, something that has been waiting for..." Sophia felt a chill creep up her spine. She could hear the ocean crashing against the ship's hull, but this time, The sound seemed different, darker, more menacing. "What is it?" she whispered. The man hesitated for a long moment, then took a slow step toward her. "Enough," he said again. "The sea calls to us all. It calls to you. You are part of it now." Sophia took a step back, her mind racing. She had to get out of there. She had to find a way off the ship before it was too late. But the man's next words stopped her cold. The ship took you. The sea took you," he said, his voice now tinged with a strange reverence. "You're bound to it now. There is no escape." Sophia felt her stomach drop. "No," she said, shaking her head in disbelief. "I'm not part of this. I don't belong here." The man gave a sad smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "You're already a part of us. You." Sophia stumbled backward, her hands pressed to her temples as the weight of his words crashed down on her. Her heart pounded in her chest, and for a moment she thought she might lose her mind entirely. But then a thought emerged, a memory. The invitation. The Solstice Horizon had promised an exclusive hidden paradise, a luxury cruise unlike any other. But what if that wasn't the real reason for the voyage? What if this had all been planned, arranged from the very beginning? She remembered the strange, almost hypnotic feeling she had experienced when she first boarded the ship. The sense that something was pulling at her, calling to her. She thought it was just the excitement of the trip, the thrill of something new, but now it felt like the ship had been waiting for. The man took another step toward her. "You're not the first," he said softly. "There have been many before you, and there will be many." Sophia didn't know what he meant, but she didn't need to. She knew what she had to do. She had to find a way to break the ship's hold on her. She couldn't let herself be another passenger lost to the depths of the Solstice Horizon. Her eyes fell on the chest in the corner of the room, the one covered with the strange symbols. She had a feeling that whatever secret the ship was hiding, whatever curse it carried, was locked inside that chest. With newfound determination, she turned toward the chest, stepping past the man. She didn't wait for him to stop her this. The chest was heavy, its lid sealed tight with an intricate lock. She didn't know how, but something inside her urged her to open. And as she reached for the lock, she felt the unmistakable sensation of eyes watching her. She wasn't alone anymore, and whatever was inside that chest was waiting for her. Sophia's fingers trembled as she reached for the lock on the chest. The air around her seemed to thicken, pressing in on her from all sides. Her heart pounded, the rhythm echoing in her ears as she tried to steady her breath. The strange man stood behind her, silent now, watching with that same eerie calm. She could feel his presence, felt it in her bones, in the very air around her. It was as if the entire room was holding its breath, waiting for her to open the chest, waiting for her to reveal the secret buried deep within. With a swift movement, she unlatched the lock. The metal clinked loudly in the otherwise quiet room, a sound that seemed to resonate with something deep inside. Inside the chest was a mass of old, tattered cloth, the fabric worn and stained with age. But beneath the cloth, Sophia saw something that made her freeze, something that made her blood run cold. A book. Bound in dark, cracked leather, its cover embossed with the same strange symbols she had seen throughout the ship. The symbols that haunted her dreams, the symbols that had been scrawled on the walls, the floor, the door. Sophia reached for the book, her fingers brushing the cold surface of the leather. As soon as her hand made contact, a shudder ran through her body, a wave of coldness that numbed her fingertips. She pulled back instinctively, but she knew she had to touch it. She had to know what was inside. Taking a deep breath, she opened the book. The pages were yellowed, brittle with age, and filled with intricate writing that was indecipherable to her. But the strange symbols, those same symbols, were everywhere, scrawled across every page. At first, it didn't make sense. The words were a jumble of letters, ancient characters that seemed to shift and writhe before her eyes, like they were alive. Then, as her gaze lingered on one page, the symbols seemed to start making sense. It was as if something clicked inside her. She was reading something she shouldn't understand, but she did understand. The words began to form coherent sentences, and though she couldn't recall ever seeing them before, she knew they were true. Solstice Horizon, a ship that had been built not just to sail, but to carry something far older, far darker, something that had been imprisoned in the depths of the sea for centuries. The ship, it seemed, had always been destined for this purpose, to transport that which had been bound and hidden. It had been sailing for hundreds of years, bringing with it an ancient force that demanded blood. The ship's passengers were never truly its passengers. They were offerings, sacrifices to the thing beneath the ocean's depth. So itched as she realized what the book was telling her. She wasn't just a passenger. She was a sacrifice. The ocean had been calling to her, beckoning her long before she ever stepped onto the ship. It had been waiting for her. Her fingers shook as she turned the pages, the eerie symbols seeming to grow more and more vivid as she read. The text spoke of rituals, dark rites performed by the crew, by those who had sworn themselves to the ancient entity that had been bound to the ship. Each year, the ship sailed to a specific place, a place where the ocean was deepest, where the entity could rise. And now, it was her turn. Sophia slammed the book shut, her heart racing. Her body was cold with fear. The weight of the ship's curse pressed heavily on her chest, suffocating. But there was no time to think about the curse. She needed to escape. Her head snapped up as the door creaked open behind her. She spun around, expecting to see the man, but it wasn't him this time. It was one of the hooded figures. It moved with the same unnerving fluidity, its face hidden beneath its dark hood. But this time, Sophia noticed something different. The figure's hands were not human. They were long, twisted and bony, with fingers that seemed too long to be real. The skin was pale, almost translucent, and with each movement, the air grew colder. Sophia could feel the weight of its gaze even though she couldn't see its eyes. The figure reached up and slowly removed its hood. Sophia gasped. The face was pale, just like the other figures, but this one was different. The skin was stretched too tight, the eyes hollow black pits. The lips were cracked, as if the figure hadn't spoken in centuries. Its teeth, sharp, jagged, gleamed in the dim. And then, it smiled. "Do you understand now?" the figure whispered, its voice deep and guttural. It sounded as though it was speaking from the bottom of the ocean. "You cannot escape your fate, Sophia. The sea has..." Sophia stumbled back, her breath coming in short, panicked bursts. She had to get away. She had... No, she gasped, shaking her head furiously. "I'm not a part of this. I don't believe..." The figure stepped closer. "You belong to the ocean now," it said, "and the ocean always claims its..." The air in the room felt like it was growing thicker, colder. The walls seemed to close in on her, and Sophia could hear the distant sound of waves, louder now, almost deafening. It was as though the ocean was calling, pulling her toward the abyss. "No," she shouted, her voice breaking. "No!" Suddenly, the ship lurched. The entire vessel shuddered, as though it had been struck by something massive, something beyond comprehension. Sophia stumbled forward, grabbing the edge of the table for support. The figure didn't move, but its eyes, those hollow pits, never left. The ship's lights flickered violently. Then, all at once, the power went out again. The darkness returned. Sophia's breath caught in her throat. She felt a sudden pull, like an invisible force was drawing her toward the door. She didn't know where she was going, but she couldn't stay here. She had to leave. The sound of footsteps echoed through the hall. Not just one set, but many dozens of them. It was the crew. They were coming for her. Her mind screamed for escape. She ran toward the door, her heart pounding. She didn't know how much time she had before they reached her, before the ocean took its... She sprinted down the hall, her eyes wild, her body trembling with fear. She had to get out. And then, she saw. Through the faint glow of emergency lights, stood the exit, the door to the deck, the only way out. She ran toward it, her feet pounding against the cold floor. But as she reached the door, it slammed shut. "No!" she screamed, banging her fists against the door. "Let me..." But the door didn't open. The footsteps behind her grew louder, closer. She could feel their presence, the crew, the figure. And then she heard it. The deep, eternal voice of the sea, calling to... Sophia turned, her body shaking uncontrollably. "You cannot escape," the voice whispered. "You belong to the sea." Her breath hitched. And then, everything... Sophia's mind raced as the cold darkness closed in on her. Her breath came in ragged gasps, and every instinct told her to run, to fight, to find any way to escape the suffocating grasp of the solstice horizon, but there was nowhere to go. Still locked, her frantic pounding unable to break it open. She could feel the ship groaning beneath her feet, as though the very hull were alive, shifting, responding to the presence of something ancient and unstoppable. The footsteps behind her were growing louder, faster, closing in with each passing moment. She turned slowly, the weight of her desperation sinking into her chest. The crew, those strange, hooded figures, were coming for her. They had been waiting for her all along, drawn to her the moment she set foot aboard the ship. She could feel their cold, empty eyes on her, their silent presence filling the hall. The leader of the figures stepped forward. It was the same figure she had seen in the room with the chest, the one who had warned her. He tilted his head slightly, the movement fluid, almost inhuman. "Escape, Sophia," he said, his voice deep and otherworldly, as if it resonated from the depths of the ocean itself. "The sea has already claimed you. You are part of it now." Sophia felt a cold wave wash over her as the words sank in. The ocean. It had been calling to her since the moment she boarded the ship. She had felt it, deep in her bones, like a pull she couldn't resist. She had thought it was just the excitement of the cruise, the allure of the unknown, but it was something far darker. The ship wasn't just a vessel, it was a prison meant to carry the cursed cargo of the sea. Her heart in her chest as the figure advanced toward her. She wanted to scream, to run, but her legs felt like lead. The cold was suffocating, as if the very air were thickening with some unseen force. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, I won't be a part of this. I won't let you take me." The figure didn't respond. Instead, he raised his hand slowly, and the others behind him did the same. The symbols from the book, the same ones that had haunted her dreams, began to glow faintly on their palms. As they did, the room seemed to twist and distort, the walls bending in ways that defied. With the sound of the ocean, the crashing of waves, the deep rumble of the sea. But it wasn't just the sound of water, it was a voice calling to her from the depths, a voice she could no longer ignore. It was the voice of the end. "You belong to the ocean now," the figure said again, his voice almost hypnotic. "It has claimed." Sophia's vision blurred, her knees shaking. The pull of the sea was stronger than ever. She felt it in her very soul, as though the ocean was calling to her, reaching up to claim her, to drag her into its depths. The ship was no longer just a ship, it was part of something much older, much darker. It was a vessel meant to carry the sacrifices to the ocean's eternal. But something inside Sophia stirred, something deep within her that refused to give in. She had spent her whole life fighting against forces she didn't understand, and she wasn't about to stop. With every ounce of strength she had left, Sophia turned and the footsteps behind her grew louder. She could hear them, feel them, but she didn't dare look back. She couldn't, not now. She reached the stairwell leading down to the lower decks, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she descended, each step faster than the last. She had no idea where she was going. She was running on pure instinct, the need to escape overpowering every other thing. The ship groaned again, a deep guttural sound that reverberated through the walls. Sophia stumbled but kept running, refusing to slow down. She had to find a way to stop it, to stop the ship from fulfilling its dark purpose. At the bottom of the stairs she saw it, a door, a small door, hidden away in a narrow passage, barely visible in the dim light. She didn't know why she was drawn to it, but something told her it was her only. She rushed toward the door, her fingers trembling as she gripped the handle. She turned it, the door creaking open to reveal a small room filled with machinery. There were levers, buttons, and switches, all part of the ship's engine. She didn't hesitate. Without thinking, she began pulling levers, pressing buttons, trying anything she could to stop the ship. But a voice, softer this time, closer. "You can't stop it," the voice said, and when she turned around, there was the figure again, standing in the doorway, his eyes glowing faintly. "It's too late. The ocean will always claim what it did." Sophia's heart sank. The figure was right. The ship was moving toward its destination. There was no stopping it. There was no escaping the pull of the ocean. But even as the hopelessness of the situation settled in, something inside her snapped. She wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. She had to try. With one last burst of energy, She yanked at the lever with all her strength. The ship shook violently. The walls around her trembled, and for a moment, everything went still. It was as if the world had paused, holding its breath. Then, with a deafening roar, the ship lurched to one side, throwing her to the ground. The sound of waves crashing, louder than ever before, filled the room. Sophia gasped for breath, struggling to stand. The figure was gone, the darkness was gone, but the sound of the ocean, the voice of the entity, the ship was sinking. The floor beneath her trembled again, and the walls began to buckle. She could feel the ship groaning under the pressure, the weight of the water pushing against it. The solstice horizon had finally reached its final destination. Sophia made her way to the deck, her legs weak, but her determination stronger than ever. She burst out onto the open deck, the ocean before her, the dark sky above. The sea was calm now, almost too calm. The waves lapped gently against the side of the ship, as if the water were waiting. And then, in the distance, she saw a shadow, a shape moving in the water, growing closer. It was massive, rising from the depths, its form glistening in the moonlight. It was the entity, the thing that had been waiting, hidden in the ocean for centuries. Sophia felt the pull again, stronger than ever. The ocean wanted her. It was reaching out, pulling her toward. But she wouldn't go quiet. With all the strength she had left, she ran to the edge of the ship, her arms outstretched as if to defy the sea itself. She wasn't going to be a part of this. Not today. But before she could make her final stand, before she could throw herself into the sea or do anything to stop the inevitable, the ship's stern snapped. It cracked in two, and the solstice horizon began to sink in. Sophia's scream was lost to the deck. Crew, the cursed voyage, they were all gone. And as the ocean swallowed the last remnants of the ship, a whisper echoed through the water, through the dark. You were always meant to be part of this.